Hello and welcome to the Getting There Show, where we speak with brilliant people and unpack the key influences and decisions that have helped them get to where they are today. You'll get the books, the mental models, the inspirations, and all the steps in their journey to help guide you on your own path. As Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Today's giant is an awesome chap called Tom Lawrance, who after stints in event management, online startups, journalism and marketing, joined what was then a small company from Seattle called Amazon, where he worked his way from digital marketing to building and running the team responsible for hiring business school graduates into Amazon's consumer and leadership programs across Europe. He is now head of careers in global industries at Oxford University's Saïd Business School, which helps students transition their career into any sector that isn't finance or management consulting. Sometimes we cover a lot here, like Tom's tips and tricks for getting into Amazon, why behavioural interviews are so powerful, how Amazon UK used to do their meetings in a curry house in Slough, and which books and quotes have been powerful for his journey. As always, we make sure to include all of Tom's toolkit and influences in the show notes so as to maximise the chances that this show helps you get to where you want to get to. So welcome, Tom. How are you doing today?
I am doing good, thank you, Frederick. It is, it's a Friday. It's nearly Christmas. I've just had my birthday. It's my favourite time of year. Basically, it's a good time to be alive, and we're just getting to the end of a busy term, work-wise as well. So I've got the nice bright lights of Christmas Day on the horizon. I'm excited.
Excellent. And whereabouts are you? You in Oxford itself?
No, I'm just south of Oxford, about half an hour's drive south out into the sticks. So I'm in my front room currently, surrounded by plants, as you can see, but basically trying to follow the light, because I find sitting in a dark room for long periods can really kind of affect my energy. So I basically follow the sun where I can, and move around the house, because I've been working from home since March, and finally finding ways to kind of make the environment as good as it can be.
Excellent. So one of the first questions I like to ask in the Getting There show is for our guests to plot out their journey to date. And you've had a really interesting journey so far, obviously culminating now with your role at Saïd Business School, Oxford. So could you just give us a little potted history of the career so far of Tom Lawrance?
Sure. I mean, whenever I kind of think about this, it always makes me feel old to start with, because every time I count it up, I find out that I've been working for 25 years now, and
a quarter of a century.
I've made it. So I didn't start working when I was 5 either. Just to point out, I'm probably I look younger than I am. So I started basically. I moved out of home age 16 and started working full time then. So kind of straight in with a job in the events industry. And this is, bear in mind, mid-90s, pre-minimum wage. So I found myself slogging away, not knowing any different, essentially working 80 hours a week for the equivalent of £40 a week. So kind of learning the hard way, but loved being in events. That I kind of, when I made the decision to kind of start working, it was following my kind of heart with what I kind of enjoyed doing, and that was organizing things. So I basically jumped into events management, ended up doing that for 10 years, just generally working my way up in the industry. But then after 10 years, the opportunity came to switch careers, and long story short, just jumped into journalism. Again, following my heart, and what I enjoyed doing, what I was good at was writing. So I somehow landed what I thought was the dream job, basically being a staff writer for a national motorbike magazine, getting to road test the fastest bikes, and get all the gear. It was brilliant, but it was terribly paid, and just a really kind of dangerous industry to be in. Like, frankly, riding machinery at 150 miles an hour generally has its hazards. So I did that for a year, but then realized it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. So I moved into the much safer surroundings of a startup with some friends. And essentially we were aggregating web traffic, in short. And this was, again, a while back. So this model doesn't really exist anymore, but we were buying and selling web traffic, bidding on keywords. We'd worked out some algorithms that meant we could confidently bid on stuff that we knew we'd make money on. But then I think Google realized people were doing that and changed the model. So we couldn't make enough money to sustain our business anymore. So that's when I then joined Amazon. And again, I kind of, for me, that was like a natural move from kind of learning the online world and a bit of digital content, digital marketing. That translated well into my first role at Amazon, which was a site merchandiser, but essentially a digital marketer. So I did that for a while and essentially was part of what I saw of the evolution of digital marketing in a nutshell. Went from creating content and writing lots of words to then learning about optimization, efficiency, using data to drive decisions. So it was really cool to be part of, like, see my role evolve and learn new things. And then all the while I was an active hiring manager, and ultimately that's then what led me to kind of move roles within Amazon. So I'd kind of gone as far as you could go in digital marketing at Amazon. I'd done that for 8 years. There was nowhere else for me to go. So I was thinking about what to do differently. And again, what was I passionate about? What was I good at? And the opportunity to second into the role that I took, which was running MBA recruitment across Europe, seemed like a big leap. But actually, Amazon were great at kind of holding my hand through that and putting their faith in me and trusting me that actually the experience that I had of brand management, of organization, of data-driven decision making, all of that actually lends itself well to the world of recruitment. And then so I ended up doing that for 3 years and grew the MBA recruitment program from hiring about 15 MBAs a year to probably 150, 160 MBAs a year by the time I left after 3 years. And that's then what took me to Oxford. It was one of the schools, obviously, I was hiring from. Loved the campus, lived relatively nearby. Again, I'd done 3 years of something. I'd gone through that cycle of learning it, developing it, and growing it. It was a great time for me to, again, think of a new challenge. And when Oxford came calling, it was just a great opportunity to get closer to people and translate my experience into helping people. And that was 3 years ago, although I can't say I've got the itch to move on just yet.
Amazing. I'm sure a lot of our audience will want to know about your advice on getting into Amazon, and we'll come on to that later. But I'm intrigued as to what Amazon looked like when you first joined. Tell us.
So it was surprisingly similar in many ways. The biggest difference was just the office and the surroundings, right? So I joined in 2006 when the head office was in Slough, and no offense, Slough. Those of you who've seen the Office, the UK version of the Office, will see it's not painted in the best light, but it's not a glamorous setting. It's not the setting that Amazon has now in trendy East London. And it was a shared office where kind of the gatherings of all of the staff would take place in the function room of an Indian restaurant around the corner.
Oh, wow.
And then you fast forward to nowadays, and they've got 5,000 people that they try and find venues that they can fit everyone in. That was the biggest difference, was just the scale. But actually the working environment was very similar. That has stayed consistent, and for me that points to a lot of Amazon's success, is the consistency of how they use the leadership principles in everyday life to kind of run things, to make things happen, to measure people's performance. They've stuck very true to embedding the leadership principles in everything that everyone does, and that pulls everyone in the same direction, and makes a great working environment, like genuinely great, because you know where you stand, you know what's expected of you, and you can be confident in calling people out on things, using the leadership principles to guide you, basically.
Interesting. And can you give an example of something that you experienced back then, which was kind of guided and shaped by one of the leadership principles?
Yeah. So the one that stands out was it's quite a seminal moment where I really saw customer obsession kind of come true and be really held to strength. So this was when I was in the film and TV business of Amazon. And you may remember this, Frederick, Mamma Mia coming out as one of the biggest movies of all time, surprisingly, like out of nowhere. It became Amazon's biggest ever pre-ordered film. And there was a lot of momentum behind it, and Amazon had a pre-order price guarantee, essentially, whereby obviously if you order the DVD or the Blu-ray as a customer, and if the price dropped after the point you pre-ordered it, Amazon would kind of honor the price that it went down to, and that was a big thing for them. It was about building long-term customer trust, and of course this was in the day when there was big film after big film coming out, and we were a big player in that market. It just so happened that the day after Mamma Mia came out, another leading supermarket dropped their price massively, and as things stood, the pre-order price guarantee didn't really actually come into effect because the film was already out. But Amazon, I was in the meeting room when the decision was made to actually honor the pre-order price guarantee, and it meant Amazon paid out six figures of profit, essentially. In fact, no, it was seven figures of profit. Wow. In just to keep the customer trust, even though they didn't have to. It was like that decision was made in the blink of an eye. It's the right thing to do. And we lost a lot of money on that. But that was what customer obsession was about.
And you probably, have kept a lot of those customers, based on that obsession with the customer experience.
Exactly that.
I think it's quite interesting as well, looking at how Bezos speaks now about some of the ventures that Amazon is getting into. So, for instance, I think this year or it might have been last year, they announced that they were partnering with various organizations to go into healthcare. And he was asked by a journalist, well, how are you going to succeed in healthcare? It's a vertical that probably very little about. And he says, well, we're just going to approach it with a beginner's mindset. And then if you read his first ever shareholder letter, he talks about the need for the organization to always think about them being in day one. So those two things are very coherent and a very consistent narrative.
So it's a really good point. The day one mentality is the other thing that really has stood the test of time and hasn't changed and won't change. That quote is in his letter to shareholders, right? Back in the 1990s, and he still rolls it out every year. It's still day one, and they genuinely do kind of take that approach to running the business.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a really good sort of foundation to then approach the next question, which is what is your advice and tips for people wanting to get into Amazon specifically, and then big tech more broadly?
Yeah. So, gosh, where to begin, right? It is. I always find that sometimes people can think of tech as a thing, and that if you do this, take a certain approach, then you've got a way in, basically. But it's really hard to say that across tech, because certainly from the exposure that I have now in my current role, seeing lots of tech firms recruit, they all do it differently. And actually, so that tech as a sector is really broad, really diverse, and there isn't a specific way that you can necessarily get guaranteed. But if you strip everything back and really boil it down, I think you can generally find that if you network really, really well and effectively, and you put in the work to build relationships and get inside help from an organization that you want to join, then that is going to be the best way and the most efficient way for you to move into an organization. And so this is not just Amazon, it's not just tech, it's any organization really. In tech, where you've got very diverse backgrounds of employees, I think people can kind of use that to their advantage, in that you can't just say, oh, well, I haven't got technical experience, so therefore I've got no chance in tech. That's not true. Tech as an industry is great at hiring diverse backgrounds, from what I see. So actually, you've got a connection to someone somewhere, and therefore putting the work in to network. And by that I mean, it's not necessarily about going to events and going into rooms and talking to groups of people. It's about doing your research as much as anything, and finding people that you've got something in common with, who work at organizations that you're interested in, and kind of doing the work of finding out what you can, but then going to people with very specific and pointed questions to help you build the picture and optimize your candidacy ultimately. So for me, that's the way to get into Amazon as much as it is any organization. It's the of course, with Amazon, and I'll maybe talk about this more specifically, that there are a lot more known quantities, and therefore you can mitigate for how competitive and difficult it is to get into Amazon by researching the known elements and preparing as much as you can for it, that you can't do for many other tech organizations. And that's where networking becomes really important. But for Amazon, certainly in business school recruitment, where a referral doesn't carry weight in most cases, then actually it's about preparing for interviews. Because if you're at a business school that Amazon recruits from, you've got your foot in the door in terms of your application being able to go in. And then it's about standing out from the crowd and putting yourself forward well as a candidate with compelling evidence. Amazon are very good at making objective recruitment decisions. I've seen that from the inside. I've built a recruitment process for Amazon that goes from school to school, that is very robust, but it's also very fair. And it's not about people's backgrounds. It's about gathering evidence of what that individual has done, and how does that align to the leadership principles, which, as I've mentioned, are lived and breathed at Amazon. So for people to do well, it's about understanding the leadership principles. It's about understanding the recruitment process as much as you can, and it's about preparing for it. So, the people I see do well are the ones who prepare stories, and by stories I mean examples of their previous work, and how that aligns to Amazon's leadership principles, because that's what Amazon builds their assessment around. Yes, there are other things that kind of come into play depending on the team and the role and whatever. Some will have the case type scenario questions, other roles will have more technical tests and so on. But actually, for every single role, the majority of the decision is based on behavioral interviews. So preparing for behavioral interviews is a known quantity. It's where you can spend your time knowing that it will pay off, and therefore having specific examples and being ready to be grilled on them is where you can succeed.
And have you seen instances where students have invested a lot of time into kind of preparing for behavioral interviews, and that really paying off in terms of employability?
Yeah, I see it every year, right? So this is the benefit of the role I've got now, is that the visibility of seeing who puts in the work, who really thinks about it the right way. But that's not to say that the people who put in the hard work and prepare really well, many of them don't get an offer as well. So the hard work isn't a ticket or a guarantee either. I think at the end of the day, the work still has to align to the leadership principles. And it's not a case of kind of forcing the narrative and making your examples fit Amazon. At the end of the day, the interviewers are so good that they will kind of work out what genuinely aligns and what doesn't. It's not about taking a surface level answer, that perfectly kind of honed script that someone's put a lot of time into. It's really about getting into the detail and the nitty gritty of the why, the what, and the who, and so on, to fully understand what that person did and how they did it. So, of course, I'm yet to see someone who's taken a lazy approach and kind of winged it and get an offer. Of course, that's the process is so robust that it does catch those people out. But of course, that's where people do need to put the work in to prepare the examples, but that's still never a guarantee. And this comes back to the research, understanding the leadership principles, understanding what Amazon are looking for, and accepting that sometimes you're not what they're looking for. And you dust yourself off and you try and look for other roles at Amazon where maybe you are a better fit for.
And actually, the process of thinking about your story and aligning it to the principles of a business is kind of universally useful. So even if you don't land a job at Amazon, you've still gone through a process which will pay off in other applications.
You're right, and that's exactly what I told my students who just started their MBA this term. For those who are putting the work in to create behavioral examples, many of them won't get an offer from Amazon, but actually, the work that they've done to think about their previous work and position it in an interview is something that many other tech organizations and beyond use. Behavioral interviewing is very common. It's a great way for companies to assess candidates objectively and at scale. This is something I've talked about to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, actually in the UK. They're supporting UK businesses in their growth. And one particular topic I was asked to talk to them about was how you can use behavioral interviewing to hire when you're growing quickly. And I certainly see it being a very effective way across sectors, because it's all about evidence and facts, and you can train interviewers to consistently get this evidence and make objective decisions. So I'm forever preaching behavioral interviews on both sides.
One of the things that I think is also very important for people who want to get into big tech is having a really solid understanding of the businesses themselves. So I was always really surprised in doing interviews at Google, hearing candidates really struggle with explaining what Google does. And so I think that's also a really important thing to bear in mind. And actually, in all of our digital training, we teach what we call sit-up statements, which are little insights and snippets of information which will immediately make an interviewer sort of sit up and take notice. And I guess that's also quite important for Amazon.
Completely, you're absolutely right, Frederick. I've been there as an interviewer as well on the other side, and kind of asking hundreds upon hundreds of candidates, why do you want to work for Amazon? And you get very different answers, and there are some that make you sit up, and of course that's a big part of the, I guess, recruitment process at Amazon and at other organizations, is that motivation piece. Why do you want to work for this organization? And what is it about the opportunity that really excites you? And it's really important for people to have compelling answers for that. You can't just get an off the shelf, well, Amazon are growing really quickly, they're very customer obsessed, blah, blah, blah. This is all stuff you can read on the internet. You need to show genuinely what it is specifically about that organization that really appeals to you and why.
And I guess that's about tying it back to your story. So if you can fuse both sort of personal interest and personal experience with something that the business is doing, then that creates a very powerful narrative.
100%.
And I see, Tom, you were recently interviewed by Business Insider, so you're getting quite the expert in big tech recruitment.
Yeah, I was, very, very humbled to be asked by them. But I guess when I step back and look at the experience that I've had and the profile that I've got, actually, it gives me confidence that I can talk to the subject. The fact that I've done over 1,000 interviews at Amazon, that there's not many people in the world who've done that, and actually that experience over time has taught me a lot about behavioral interviewing. So again, not just about Amazon, but that as a method. And then of course being here at Oxford, the view that I get of the recruitment landscape. I get to see what Google are doing, what Facebook are doing, what hundreds of tech companies are doing to hire people. So I get this great visibility of the latest recruitment methods, and can kind of try and pass on that knowledge and find ways to help people prepare for interviews accordingly. But a lot of the work I do is to kind of set people up to do their own research. So I often, spend a lot of time managing expectations that I'm not a recruitment agent. I'm not the one who's going to get people the interview or through the interviews. They need to do that work themselves. But at least the knowledge, the wider knowledge of the landscape is something I'm always happy to talk about.
Excellent. So let's now move on to the third question, which is around the influences that have sort of guided you through your journey. So I like to ask guests firstly about books. So is there a particular book that you can point to which has had a big impact?
Yeah, it's a funny one, this, because I wouldn't consider myself a kind of a bookworm, really, actually. Yes, I read books, but there isn't necessarily like a seminal moment of reading a book for me. But actually, there is a book that stands out as being really important and significant. And for me, that's the 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton. And this is the one book that I talk about the most in my life. It's the one that I feel most confident in, and obviously it relates to people who are making a career switch, and genuinely speaking, seeing firsthand how that methodology gets applied in the current market. It's standing the test of time really, really well, and it's a very effective methodology. So it's a book that I recommend to everyone that I speak to when they're on their job search, because it helps you work out what you want to do, what you're passionate about. It helps you identify organizations that are of interest to you based on your personal drivers. And then it gives you a bit of a system, because I love a good spreadsheet, and it gives you a good system to keep focused and use your time effectively when time is precious, to build momentum on your job search and focus your time on organizations that you're interested in and levers that you can pull to help you get there. So if anyone hasn't read the 2-Hour Job Search, and especially if they're at business school, got to read that book. It is so important and it's so helpful. That's my recommendation.
Brilliant. Well, we'll include that recommendation in the show notes. So my second question is around quotes. So we've known each other for a while now, and you're probably aware that I like to bring quotes into most conversations. Is there a particular quote that has guided you in the same way that book has?
Well, again, it's a slightly non-traditional answer for you, in that again, I'm not one for kind of motivational quotes per se. I certainly, my work history shows that I've always just kind of got on with things and made things happen, and that for me then kind of bubbles up into the sentiment of JFDI is my favorite quote, essentially. And of course, for those who maybe don't know of that acronym, it's a slightly sweary version of Nike's motto of "Just do it." Because for me, seeing people kind of many times going through their career journey and bemoaning things not going their way, actually, you need to be the one to make things happen. And people just need to jump in and start making things happen. And I that's what I did for making my multiple career pivots. And I, so I've experienced firsthand the benefit of forging your own path and making things happen. But also, again, in the spirit of the 2-hour job search, where networking is so important, you just need to get out there and talk to people and ask bold questions and be insightful and do the work. And that's how you can kind of make progress, is just do it.
Nice. Well, actually, it's a nice tie-in to one of Amazon's key sort of operating principles, which is to disagree and commit. So Bezos talks a lot about the need to just try things, and even if he disagrees himself with his executives, he's happy to take a back step and let them run with the decision, as long as the business can look at the data and learn from it.
Yeah, exactly. We probably saw that most prominently with the Fire Phone, right? I saw, again, as a kind of a senior manager at Amazon, that you have the space to fail. Another one of their leadership principles is "I'll write a lot." It's not "I'll write all of the time," and it's deliberately designed that way, that you can fail as long as you fail fast, and learn from it. So yeah, it's a great environment to be innovative and to try things out, because you, at the same time, you've got the leadership principle of frugality, keeping you honest in terms of it's not about throwing money at something willy-nilly, just for the sake of acting fast and making something happen. You still need to be smart with resources, but you are encouraged to think big and to try different things and learn from mistakes. And that's a classic one for the interview process, because how it's always an interesting subject to try and kind of hear how someone has dealt with failure, because it's not something you would naturally want to talk about in an interview, because it's showing you in a bad light.
But some vulnerability is good. And I guess it makes you human.
Completely. And, as an interviewer, I've been there, I've been pushing candidates to be humble, right? You can't sit there and say, I've never made a mistake. And believe me, I've been in proper interviews where a candidate has said that, time after time. People think they can say, well, I don't make mistakes, and everyone does, right? You've got to be able to articulate where you have made a mistake, where something hasn't gone as planned, and what you've learned from it. That humility is really important.
Do you reply saying, well, you've made one now?
No, I'm a nice interviewer. I know everyone has their different styles. I've always been on the side of being kind of harsh but fair. So I would say, well, I would really encourage you to think of an example where something maybe hasn't gone quite as you would like, and I would try and reframe it for them and help them where I could. But at the end of the day, if they still can't give me something, then it's a no.
Yeah. Well, it's a really nice segue into my last question, which is talking around interview questions. So what was your favorite interview question when you were at Amazon? And then how would you yourself answer that question?
Yeah, so I have lots of favorites, because there are so many. There are hundreds of questions in an interview bank that Amazon interviewers use. So that the topic of questions is always one I kind of bring up with my students, because I don't want them to feel like that if they get a list of 50 questions, for example, a document that I use for mock interviews contains a selection of questions. I don't want people to feel that if you learn answers for these questions, then you'll be fine in the process, because that's not how it works. So in a very roundabout way, there is a question that I often use, which is, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager and something that you deemed to be important to the business. And this is off the back of what we were just talking about, right? That humility and that ability to talk through what you've learned from a mistake. So that was a favorite of mine as an interviewer, and it's a favorite of mine now as a mock interviewer, because it really challenges people to think beyond all of the kind of awesome stories that people have, and think about where stuff went wrong. And it always, for me as well, then gives me the opportunity to go two ways depending on the type of example that someone comes up with, because at a high level, it's a deliberately open question that it's when you've disagreed, and it doesn't specify whether it's an argument that you've won or an argument that you've lost, right? So this comes back to the have backbone, disagree, and commit leadership principle. Amazon want to see two different things with this. It's the fact that you have backbone and will stand up and fight for something you believe in, but at the same time, in the right circumstance, you will disagree but commit to doing something you don't agree with. So then, depending on an example that a candidate would give to me, I'd then ask them for the other one, and it was always a really kind of nice segue into then getting another example from someone, so that you challenge people to kind of consider both elements. You can't get away with just being the kind of hard, tough person who always gets their own way. You have to show that you can disagree with someone as well. So that was why that was a favorite of mine as an interviewer. It gave me lots of opportunity to kind of explore and get into some quite, challenging circumstances and uncomfortable things for interviewers for candidates to talk about. And that's where my style as an interviewer, I think, then came out well, that I could guide people to both sides of the story with experience. And then to your other question, Frederick, about what a good answer would look like. So obviously a good answer is going to cover one of the two dimensions first and foremost. A good answer is going to be a very specific example. So a big failing point of candidates often is talking holistically about what they would like to do or what they've done in general terms in situations like that. Amazon wants specific, and a lot of organizations will want specific examples. That's where you get into being a good interviewer, where you're pushing people for specifics. It's not good enough to say, well, I like to do this and I like to do that. I want a specific example so that we can get into the detail of what you did and why you did it. So first and foremost, I'm pushing for that specificity. And then really, obviously, a good example is going to show one of the two dimensions and actually show what that person learned from it. So this comes back to being well researched and well prepared. If you've practiced this with peers, if you've practiced it with friends and family, you've got used to being pushed and asked for more detail, because that's what happens in the interview. It's never just give me the example, thank you very much, we'll move on. It's, so you said this, so what did that mean, and why did you do it that way, and so on and so on. And the interviewer has been trained to be an investigative reporter. So you need to be ready to answer lots of follow-up questions and be open to answering them as best you can.
That's a real gold mine there for anyone really to navigate job interviews, but particularly at Amazon. So yeah, that's my last question, Tom. It's been a real pleasure asking you these questions and getting such rich and detailed answers. We're going to end though on a couple of questions from our community. So we have this exclusive LinkedIn community called the Growth Community, and one of the perks of being in the community is being able to ask the podcast guest questions. And so we've got a question from a guy called Prashant, and he says, how does one maximize their chances of getting into Amazon? I know we've covered some of this, but it'd be good to just review that again succinctly. And then also, how does the call-off period for Amazon work? Is it based on teams or based on the organization as a whole?
Yep, sure. So yes, that first question is, I guess, a nice way to summarize what we've talked about, and ultimately, to optimize your candidacy, you need to network well and prepare well. So it depends on the individual circumstance. So if you're at a business school where Amazon come and recruit from, then you don't have to worry so much about finding kind of inside information. Amazon are great and very proactive at kind of using their campus recruitment team to share information with candidates. It's in Amazon's interests to help people make an informed decision. So I think there's a wealth of information out there for people to read and to kind of build knowledge around. And for those who aren't at a business school that's running structured hiring, then that's where networking really kicks in to find people that you've got something in common with. So I'm not by any means advocating that you just need to hassle people on LinkedIn and just pick a load of people and send out a load of invitation requests. It's not about that. People are busy. They're not going to give up their time easily just because you've sent them an in-mail request, for example. You need to go in with a very tailored and specific message that says, I can see that we've got X in common. I'm really interested in joining Amazon. I can see that you're doing Y, and can we talk about Z? And you need to show that you've done your own work and that you are pointing them to a very specific output. So good networking, and of course then good preparation for interviews, being ready to talk about specific examples with the leadership principles in mind.
Great. And then what about the cooling off period? How does that work in Amazon?
It varies and it depends. So, I get asked this question a lot, and obviously I don't work for Amazon anymore. So things happen really fast there, things change. So I'm always conscious of my view, not necessarily being accurate or guaranteed to be accurate, but I would say ask the recruiter that you're speaking to, because it can vary in my experience. So it could be that you get really far down the line and are really close for one particular role, but someone pips you at the post, and in that case you don't necessarily have a cooling off period because you've done well in the process. Whereas in other cases, if you're clearly not a fit for Amazon, then you will be required to wait that 6 months before you apply for anything else across Amazon. The best thing to do is to ask, be explicit in asking the recruiter and reading through the communication that they send you. There shouldn't be any doubt.
And back in your time, I guess, it was possible for people to reapply, though. In your experience, you did see unsuccessful applicants then get into Amazon, later on in their journey.
Yeah, and it's a topic I'm thinking about at the moment, obviously for my current students, because this happens every year. Amazon come quite early on in the Oxford MBA, and many people apply and aren't successful, but then many people who don't get offered through the structured hiring forge their own path directly into Amazon thereafter, before they finish their MBA. So the door is definitely open, and year after year I see multiple people kind of take that on the chin and find a role that they're a better fit for and navigate their own way directly into Amazon. And that's something I really impress upon my students, because I don't want them to feel like that their chances are gone just because they haven't got into the highly competitive and super selective space of their leadership programs. Other opportunities are out there.
Great. So this is the last question from a guy called Matt, and he has asked, for a commercial product manager, what technical skills or training, for example, SQL, would stand out to an Amazon recruiter? And then secondly, what kind of skill set training would you recommend to a candidate applying to the Amazon launch LDP?
Yeah, well, it's kind of the same answer to both questions, in that for Amazon specifically, they're not kind of shy in saying this. They want people who are kind of data literate, who are able to make data-driven decisions, and actually SQL is a recognized, tangible skill that they list as a preferred skill. So this is not necessarily inside information from my perspective. I have witnessed Amazon recently come and say this is really important to us, and that's why I build it into the co-curriculum that we've got here at Oxford. It's not just Amazon who are looking for SQL. We've been running SQL training at the school ever since I was here, because it's a skill that's on many job descriptions that you would look at that is at the right level for an MBA with, average 5 to 7 years work experience under their belt, in not just tech organizations either, by the way, but many roles, including product management, want people to be able to work with big data sets and interpret data and translate that then into business language and make recommendations. So that's why we make sure our students have the opportunity to become proficient in SQL. And it's great that they can come in to the MBA without even knowing what SQL is, to being proficient in this very specific skill, and that's something that they can put on their CV. And on top of that, for the role of product management, it will vary by team within Amazon, and of course then it'll vary by organization and by sector. So product management is a really interesting and kind of hot topic at the moment, and it's why we've built out what we call our product management roadmap at the school as well, because we know there's lots of interest in lots of demand of people looking to get into product management. And there's lots of supply. There's lots of companies hiring product managers. So this comes back to the value of networking and insights. We're lucky enough to have a very active community of product managers who are willing to share their experience and their insights. And people need to tap into that. So, if you're an aspiring product manager, find an alumni, find a second degree connection who is a product manager in the area that you're interested in, and find out from them what skills are important at that time. Data literacy is always going to be a common factor. So it's safe to say learning SQL will stand the test of time. But outside of that, speak to people in the industry and get that real-time view.
Great. We've done some really good interviews actually on the podcast with product managers. So for those listening, do check those out for further tips and tricks. Thanks so much, Tom. It's been a real blast. I do feel like your plant collection behind you is somewhat more impressive than mine. So I'll have to add some more plants to the next episode. But yeah, have a wonderful day, and I'm sure you'll receive many requests to impart further knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Frederick. Yes, I am on LinkedIn, and I'm fully open to welcome any connection requests. Of course, using the advice that I've given, that they're tailored and specific. So I'm afraid if you're going to reach out to me and just send me a blank connection request, I will probably ignore it. But tell me you've heard what I have to say, and you're interested in learning more, and come with a specific ask, and I'll happily respond. Always happy to talk about Amazon and impart what knowledge I can. So thank you for having me talk about it.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.